Hey guys, Tyler Ansman here with Tyler Ansman Performance. So today we're going to talk about a specific case study, and we're going to give you kind of a peek behind the curtain into our kind of assessment and programming process for one of our athletes. So let's dive into it. So this athlete's name is Hayden, and he came to us about a year ago. He's a two-way guy. He's a pitcher and shortstop. And so his starting numbers, he was 74 off the mound and 74 across the infield as well. Today, he's been up to 85.1 off the mound in the facility and 87 in a game. And he's been up to 91.7 on a shuffle throw, which we'll kind of use as a proxy for his infield velocity. So let's kind of talk about how we did it, what went into the assessment process, what was missing, and how we got better. All right, so the first couple things we look at when we're talking about assessing an athlete, we're going to dive into the movement and mobility stuff first, and that'll really fall into our physiological categories. So we have three basic categories we're going to break stuff up into. So we have our technical categories. This would be like the throwing specific stuff here. We have our physiological, right? So this would be all of those qualities that we're kind of training in the gym. And then we have our loading, right? So how much of anything we can do and can fit into the schedule at any one time based on the time of year, what other sports are happening, in season, off season, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so when we got him in, the first things we noticed from the technical piece of the assessment, we had some definite mechanical flaws and some areas of opportunity for growth. All right, so we had some rear leg deficiencies. So he didn't hold external rotation or abduction very well in that rear leg. So we're leaving a decent amount of kind of potential velocity on the table there because what that's really doing is we're not creating kind of that stretch and that load into these bigger muscle tissues kind of heading into foot strike. All right, so limitation there. Then we also had some arm action limitations. So he was not using his pec very well, so we were limited on horizontal abduction and retraction. And he really didn't understand how to kind of like pull his arm through / was restricted in the ability to do that physiologically, which we'll kind of touch on later. And then lever length. So when we want to move a lever really fast, we want it to be shorter, and we want to apply a lot of distal velocity and force, we want to lengthen that lever. All right, so if we think about this during the throwing motion, during layback, when the arm's about to get laid back, we want that lever to be short. So we want that angle of the elbow to be flexed somewhere between about 80 and 100 degrees, right? So plus or minus 10 degrees of 90 is about what we're looking for. He was well outside that, and so we were looking to kind of shorten that angle as well. And so kind of the way we went about doing this, we had a constraints-led approach. So we basically layered complexity as we went. So one of the first things that we started with was we used isometric holds, both in his lower body and his upper body to kind of help him get both strength and a feel for these ranges of motion that he was unfamiliar with and not strong enough in to then apply on the mound. So we kind of paired those with some specific constraints drills, and what we did is we just gradually layered the complexity on top of itself. All right, so we started with some wall iso holds for the lower body, and we went really basic with rocker and box squat variations where he really wasn't kind of adding momentum to the system in any way, right? We're basically going from a stationary position and we're just getting a feel for getting into that lower body. On the arm action side, we gave him isos where we started with yielding, we went to overcoming, and then we went to more dynamic type of movements to get a feel for that end range horizontal abduction, retraction, and then feeling that pec pull you through. All right, so we're building feel, strength, and then kind of the specific elastic qualities in that tissue that we're looking for as we go through this. On the lever length side, we went pretty simple on that. We used a connection ball, and with both of these, we started with the arm action post arm swing, and then layered the arm swing in as we went. With the lower body, we started with no momentum and gradually layered in more momentum as we went, layered in the slope, that kind of thing. So this is kind of like an overly simplistic view of how we went through that process, but that's kind of the gist of the technical side. On the physiological side, all right, his big opportunities were strength and lean mass. All right, so for reference, he started about 125 pounds of body weight when he came in. He's about 6 feet tall, so he was very thin. And he's now about 163 pounds, so he's up almost 40 pounds, so very significant in that amount of time. So what we were trying to do is we were trying to gain as much lean mass as we could without adding a ton of fat mass, because especially when you have a lighter body weight individual like this, if they add a ton of fat, it's going to change the way they move pretty significantly, because they're going to feel any amount of weight more than a bigger person is, because it's a larger percentage of their total body weight, right? So he's been in season for most of this process, so we really couldn't just be like, hey, let's gain 10 pounds in a week, which we wouldn't do anyway, because it really would affect on-field performance, both in terms of sprinting speed, how he moved on the mound, all of these other things. So we were shooting to gain, based on kind of Dr. Mike Israel's guidelines, about 0.025 to 0.05% of his total body weight per week. And so for him, that was equating to like the top end being about half a pound a week. So it's been a slow process, and that's been intentional. He's done a great job with sticking to that, tracking all those things, and doing that as we go. On the strength side, we started with kind of teaching the basic foundational movements, because he didn't have a ton of weight room experience. And then really simply, we just progressively overloaded that. We didn't make it overly complex to begin with or anything like that. And he's seen very, very significant progress in terms of strength gains in all of our main movements, and in terms of his power output, so the jump distances and heights that we track, and the med ball distances and velocities that we track. So I'll put those kind of up on the screen so you can see what those look like, rather than just kind of talking through all of those. But major implications for how the physiological stuff affected the on-field stuff. So that's kind of those two approaches. And then in terms of loading, right? So he's been a slightly more challenging case than some in terms of this last factor, because he plays two sports, baseball and hockey. And because he's good at both, he's playing a lot of each, because he has opportunities on both, right? So that's made it challenging from a loading perspective, because in season we have to be mindful of the amount of volume we're giving him based on how much he's doing at hockey practice, hockey games, and then how much he's doing in terms of baseball practice and baseball games. And so that's been challenging. So we've had to pick our spots of when we can push, whether that's in a given week or if we have a longer off period, and those kinds of things. And then we've really had to maximize our off season. So in terms of picking a spot, one good example is this past fall, he had about 3.5 weeks of no games, and his fall team doesn't practice, so that wasn't an issue. He had 3.5 weeks of no games, where we were able to give him a velocity development kind of like microcycle or mesocycle, to kind of get him ready for the showcase that was at the end of this, that was going to kind of end the fall. And then we got into like our modified off season, because hockey hadn't quite started yet, but it was about to. And so we really had to kind of maximize what we were doing through those processes. And then again, we're working around sports as we go. So that's kind of how we've done it. So he's up 13 miles an hour to this point in a little bit more than a year. So if you understand, right, the basic principles that you're trying to impact as you go through this, you can understand how you can raise these kind of on-field KPIs that you're looking to raise, whether it's speed, throwing velocity, exit velocity, whatever it might be. And that's kind of basically how we've done this. So if you're interested in learning more about our in-person or remote training, feel free to drop us an email. That'll be on the next screen, or drop it in the comments below, and I'll respond to those. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.